This is Jennifer here with J. Benson Studios, Chapter 4, April 2006. 6 years had passed since Rebecca and Michael died. For Victoria, the time moved slowly and somehow hadn't moved at all. There were moments when she thought that her mother might walk through the door. A sober feeling etched into her chest at the realization that this would never become a reality. A year had passed since she lost her friendship with Amber. The losses had begun to take a toll on her well-being. The isolation she felt continued to evolve. Her amber eyes had grown dull over time, and Victoria merely found herself staring up at the ceiling with a heavy heart, reflecting on the afternoon in the cafe. "They're watching us," she said to Amber, just before a pair of piercing red eyes captured her attention. She had never imagined at that moment how Amber would respond. "Who's watching us?" Amber asked incredulously. Victoria leaned in closer. "The shadow men." The seriousness in her tone was betrayed by the wail of laughter that escaped Amber's lips. Her laughter was so hearty and robust that it threw Victoria off guard, and she felt herself growing hot and angry from embarrassment. "Don't laugh at me. I'm being serious," she said forcefully. "If you're being serious, you have some serious issues, and maybe you need some professional help." Amber mused with finger quotes in the air. The silence that filled the space between them was deafening. Amber refused to look at Victoria for fear of saying something she might later regret. For Victoria, the rage building inside of her was hard to digest. She could see those red eyes so clearly for a moment, and now they were gone, and sitting directly across from her was someone who was supposed to be her best friend. The frustration at the situation left her with a feeling of powerlessness. She stood from her seat and walked out. As she took a step closer towards the front door, her entire body screamed at her to turn around, but her pride wouldn't allow such a display of weakness. As her fingers gripped the bar, her heart shattered. "She didn't even call my name," she thought to herself as she allowed the cool breeze from outside to soothe the ache. "I wish I had said something to her," Victoria whispered to herself as her thoughts returned to the present. "Maybe I'd be able to talk to her right now. Maybe I would be..." Her words lingered because she didn't want to think about where she was at that moment. She didn't want to think about how hard it had all become. Yet no matter how hard she tried, her mind refused to grant her peace. Her thoughts drifted to her father. After her mom passed and her dad started drinking, he had never been a drinker before, but loss had changed him. He had grown to take to the bottle like a baby takes to the breast. He was always at the bar. It had been a terrifying thought for Victoria to fear the day that he wouldn't come home either. "Dad," she said one night as she drew closer to him. He was sitting in the study, a bottle of whiskey in his hand, and his eyes were hazy. She couldn't help but notice that she had his eyes that were filled with such heartache and pain. He looked up at her as though he didn't see her at all. "Victoria." His voice came out in a whisper. He hadn't really seen her. She stood there, still and motionless, waiting for him to look at her, waiting for him to embrace her and tell her that they would be okay. She would wait in vain, for he had been like this since the first day he learned the truth about his wife. The luster of life and joy that once embodied her daddy was gone. It died with her. He looked off past her in the distance. "Victoria, where did I go wrong?" She wanted to answer him, but knew that he wasn't really speaking to her. He stared past her, looking towards the shadows of memories and fears. He looked off into the world of something Victoria had not been able to grasp. What is he thinking? She wondered as she watched him converse with his demons. "I loved her, you know. I loved her completely. She gave me 2 precious gifts, and I will cherish these gifts until the day that I die. Victoria." He paused, still not looking at her in the eye. his gaze fixed somewhere off in the distance between space and time, life and death. She stumbled upon her words, afraid to speak but afraid to remain silent. "Yes, Daddy?" The tremor in her voice mirrored the fear in her heart. "I don't know if I can do this without her. She was the strong one, you know." He took another swig of whiskey and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "She was the foundation for this family, and that stranger stole her from me. From us." He began to sob into his hands, and she knew that this was the end of their conversation. Her heart broke as she left the room, knowing that it would continue to break because she would never give up on him. She wouldn't judge him because she knew what it was like to experience grief and loss. Victoria's thoughts returned to the present. She sat up from her bed, looked around her apartment. It was a cozy studio. The twin-size bed took up a modest amount of space in the corner of the room near the window. Her apartment resided on the second floor, which she found comforting because it was just high enough to prevent intruders, but low enough for escape in an emergency situation. It was cool, so she didn't need a large cover, only a thin sheet, and the window was slightly cracked to allow the night breeze to come in. The sun peeked through the light pink curtains and laid a warm kiss on her face. She smiled because it made her feel good and peaceful. She dragged herself out of her bed and walked a few paces towards her bathroom. Inside was a shower, a toilet, and a sink. It wasn't much, but it was enough to meet her needs, and that was all that she could ask for. After she finished off her morning routine, she walked over to the kitchen, where she proceeded to brew a pot of coffee. Coffee, she said while sniffing the steaming pot that was brewing. Once it was finished, she prepared a cup and sat down at her kitchen table. It was a modest table that looked like one of those tables you would play poker on. The legs were less than steady, but the table never broke, and it only cost her $20, so she wasn't going to complain. The table came with 2 folding chairs, so in her mind, she got a bargain, and her table was perfect. Victoria, in an effort to resolve some of her shit, had taken to writing in a journal. She opened the journal that lay resting on the table and began to write.